Hello all, and welcome to our study of some of the crimes of the past and how it affects us, how it affected the people back then. In our class, we're going to be looking at Dr. Michael Stone's book, The Anatomy of Evil, and the gradient scale of evil that he uses, to where you have on one side justified homicide, where there's no blame or no fault whatsoever, and then as you go up the scale, the level of evil, whatever that is, however that's perceived or however that's talked about or however that is defined, becomes greater as you get up the scale. And he has 22 different categories. We're going to start at the beginning, at the justified homicide, and then we're going to progress further throughout the series. But it's a very interesting concept, since this is a study of psychology and it's a study of the individual and of people. I want you to look at both sides as we go through this. One side is what made the people do this. Was it some sort of mental illness that they had? Was it some sort of abuse that they were going through that made them snap? Was it a crime of passion? Did they have remorse? Did they do it for fun or for a thrill? What was the reasoning behind what they were doing when they committed the acts that they did? And then the other side I want you to look at is from the perceivers, the person that's looking at it, the journalist or the courtroom or the jury or just the reader or somebody like yourself taking a class or listening. How do we perceive that? What makes us feel that one act is evil and one act is not? Why are some things way more horrific when we first hear about them, but then somehow we start to sympathize with the person that committed the crime or the players that are involved in it? What is this huge, complex human aspect to these things that make it so that we would want to categorize them? So this should be a fun study. I look forward to going through all of this with you. I hope you like this format. I kind of made it on the fly as I was trying to figure out how to make this entertaining for you guys, how to make it fun, and how to convey as much content to you as I could in the short amount of time that we have together. So feel free to comment, and I hope that you enjoy. Here we go. So our first category, the one without blame, the one that is our self-defense or somebody breaking into our house, the one we said is okay, is called justified homicide. That's what the law calls that, because we have to remember a lot of these distinctions are going to be made by legal terminology instead of psychological or scientific type of terminology or vocabulary. So justified homicide, the word insanity is a legal term. It's not a psychological term. It is a way to try criminals and to punish them, or in this case, to not punish them. So the definition that we have is killing without evil, there's that word again, or criminal intent for which there is no blame, such as self-defense to protect oneself or another, or shooting by a law enforcement officer in fulfilling his or her duties. And so we have these three reasons, and we're going to go over a few cases for each one of them, and maybe the justification in these homicides isn't there, and it becomes more of a legal adversarial system kind of thing where whoever has the best argument wins or can paint the prettiest picture. But let's keep going and find out. So the idea of justified homicide is different across time, across space, and across geography and culture. we're in the United States, so we have our Bill of Rights and our unalienable rights of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Our Second Amendment, every citizen has the right to bear arms as long as they're not a criminal or anything else. But there's other laws that define what justifies homicide, what makes it acceptable to kill somebody in the eyes of the law so that you can avoid persecution. The first one is the Stand Your Ground law. Now this law says that you have the right to defend yourself if someone's attacking you, if they are trying to rob you, if they have a gun, if they don't, if they are threatening you in any way, then you have the right to defend yourself. The other one is the castle doctrine. This has everything to do with your house. You've heard the anecdote that if you shoot somebody, it's okay, you just got to drag them inside. Well, that's what this means, is that if someone has broken into your house, if they've violated your home in some way, then you have the right to use deadly force in order to defend your property. Then the last one is the reasonable use of force, and this has to do with police officers in the line of duty. They have a very hard job and they need to defend themselves from some people that are up to no good sometimes. So we have the reasonableness standard to see if the use of force that they used is okay or if it's not. This also applies to us as individuals. If we're standing our ground, or if we're using the castle doctrine, was the force that we use to defend ourselves acceptable to the situation? If you shoot somebody once and you kill them while they're breaking into your house, that's a whole lot different than if you stab them 193 times. So is the use of force reasonable? Did you just incapacitate the person and they died because of the fact, or did you go overboard while you were in the act of self-defense? So that's the legal distinctions that we'll be looking at, and here are some cases that involve these. The idea of justified homicide, or that killing somebody could be okay or has a definite reason behind it that makes it so that it's not a crime or not an evil, is different across time and across cultures. Shakespeare wrote about this, and jealousy was definitely the main factor in the story that he tells. Othello was a Venetian general. He was the governor of Cyprus. He was a war hero, and he could marry whoever he wanted to. He chose to marry Desdemona. Iago is definitely the antagonist in the story, and he feels that he's been done wrong, that he was passed up for position, for a political position, and it was given to his rival Cassio. So he makes a little plot to get revenge. He manipulates everybody. He starts telling lies. He starts saying that there's an affair going on between Cassio and Desdemona, that Othello is being cuckolded, and he is a prominent person in a political position. So this isn't only an embarrassment in his marriage, but it's also a public humiliation for him. To further provide evidence or proof that this affair, alleged affair, is going on, Iago plants Desdemona's handkerchief on Cassio, and his wife ends up wearing it. So that further enrages Othello, and Othello is in a position where he has to do something. Now we're talking about justified homicide. So Othello accuses Desdemona, and in a fit of rage, he kills her. This, in Othello's mind, is just the passing of summary justice. He is saving face in public. He is saving face in his marriage. But then the truth comes out. The handmaiden tells Othello about Iago's lies and Iago's treachery, and that he made up the entire story, and that Desdemona, his wife, was innocent. So now, being faced with the fact that he killed his wife and he wasn't justified in doing so, Othello kills himself because he can't live with the fact of committing that crime. So that is the line that Shakespeare draws. Either way, we would see this as murder, but it shows the difference in time and in culture and how fine line can be drawn, making this more of a legal distinction depending on where you're from, what religion you are, what country you live in, than a moral one. So the first case I want us to look at is the case of Trayvon Martin. This case had a lot of public notoriety. It was in the news for a long time. It was instrumental in a lot of the push for the Black Lives Matter movement. Trayvon Martin was a young man. He was 17 years old. He's African American in Florida. He was shot by George Zimmerman. This was I would say overzealous type of neighborhood watch coordinator. He's in a gated community. He called the police a lot for what he deemed as suspicious characters or things that were going on in the neighborhood, more so than a reasonable person would do. So Zimmerman called the police on this night to report a suspicious person. Trayvon Martin had gone to the convenience store. He wanted to get some Skittles. He was wearing a hoodie, and that's what made him look suspicious. He didn't have a car. He was just walking through this gated community. So an altercation took place after Zimmerman had called the police. There's a recorded 911 call. He starts to follow Trayvon Martin. Some sort of a struggle breaks out. Zimmerman ends up shooting Trayvon and ultimately killing him. Zimmerman did have injuries. He had a busted up nose and he was bleeding from the head. You can see that in the mug shots that were taken that night after he was arrested, because he was arrested. He was indicted for second-degree murder. He was ultimately let off because of Florida's stand your ground law. He pled self-defense. There was a trial that went on. It was huge in the public eye. It took about a month for it to happen, and Zimmerman was finally acquitted of both charges, second-degree murder and manslaughter. This case is at the forefront of a lot of protests for people trying to get the language of these laws to be changed or to be repealed altogether, because a lot of these cases have happened after the institution of these laws. These self-defense type of cases are becoming more and more prevalent in the states that have the stand your ground laws without any reasonable retreat having to happen. So our next case involves jealousy and another love triangle. We're probably going to find more than a few of these throughout this entire study. This is the case of Mr. Fredenberg. He was married to Heather, who was a 20-year-old cocktail waitress. He got her pregnant. She was pregnant with twins, so they ultimately got married, but their marriage was not one of good standing by any type of standards. They had a lot of financial issues. He drank a lot. They just were not happy with the household that they had built. So Heather began having an affair with one of the people in the community, Bryce Harper. And during this affair, Dan became suspicious. He hired a private investigator. He found out about what was going on, and he began to stalk the two lovers as they were having their illicit affair. So there was a confrontation during one of these times while he was stalking them. He was following them in the car, and they ended up at Bryce Harper's house. And Dan went into the garage of his house to confront him about having the affair. As soon as he stepped inside of Bryce's garage, Mr. Harper came out with a gun, with a handgun, and he shot him 3 times in the chest, and he immediately fell down, bled out on the floor of his garage. Heather was very upset. She is the one that made the 911 call. She ultimately got a restraining order against Bryce Harper because she was afraid of him. He had threatened her family. She was afraid that he was going to harm her or the children after the murder. The Attorney General in the state of Montana decided not to file any charges in this case because the murder was committed inside the house and it was protected by the castle doctrine law. So this next case is not a murder at all, but it is a major Supreme Court case that sets the precedent for the reasonable use of force that police officers use. And the vast majority of all justified homicide cases come out of law enforcement. Discharging a firearm in the line of duty, shooting somebody, just to protect yourself while you're doing your job. And there needs to be something in place, and this is the case that the Supreme Court used to define what that looks like for law enforcement. Now, the man that was involved, his name was Dethorne Graham. He was a African-American male. He was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he had diabetes. So he was having some sort of insulin complication and got his friend to drive him to a convenience store to get a glass of orange juice to try to get his insulin under control. He got into the convenience store, found what he was looking for, but the line was really long. It was crowded, so he left, jumped back into his friend's car. Well, across the street, a police officer, Mr. Connor, was sitting and watching the convenience store, and what he saw was a African-American man jump out of the car, run into the store, run back out of the store, jump into what he perceived as a getaway vehicle, and take off. He thought that they robbed the store. So, doing his job, doing his duty, making sure that everybody was safe, he pulled them over and wanted to find out what their story was. Now, Graham is in a diabetic fit. His blood sugar has plummeted. He doesn't have the orange juice that he needed. For some reason, he gets out of the car. He runs around the car twice and then falls unconscious on the ground. Now, he had been drinking. He was definitely drunk. The police thought that this was just some sort of drunk shenanigans, and they roughed him up. They handcuffed him. They slammed him up against the car. They used excessive force on him for sure. After he had regained consciousness, they finally released him and let him go, but he sued the police department, and in the ensuing lawsuit, he actually lost. This went through different appeals courts. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it set the precedent that is used in all of the police-involved shootings since, or any type of police brutality case since. And this sets what is called a reasonableness standard. It lets the jury look in the moment that the police officer is dealing with. What would you do in that particular moment? What would a reasonable person do if they were faced in this situation? So it kind of gets rid of all of the context of the entire case and puts it in this microcosm of somebody reaching into their jacket or somebody reaching into a car. Just that slight perception and having to make that judgment call right at that moment is what that reasonableness standard is. So now all of the laws that are surrounding any type of police shooting are called Graham laws. This is the Supreme Court's precedent for police brutality. So these are our cases of justified homicide. Like we said in our text and in class before, these are the murders that are okay. They're acceptable reasons for killing somebody. And now that we've looked at some of these, and these are really major ones that have happened in the United States, were these truly justified? Is this an acceptable reason to kill somebody? Why was the public so outraged in each one of these cases? And do you think that maybe these cases are not completely devoid of evil, or there's no blame involved in them? If there is evil in it, then how much, and on which side? So I have a worksheet for my class up on my classroom. You can find it there. Your job is to look at the links that I've provided. Some of the links go a lot more in depth. They're either videos or they're articles, and they examine these from a deeper perspective than I can in this little summary type of format that I'm giving you. So take a look at those, see what you truly think about the details of the case, and then write a brief response. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see what your thoughts are in each one of these cases. Well, thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great day. We're going to start to look deeper into the gradient scale of evil, getting a little bit more intense each and every time with the depth of these crimes. The next ones will be our crimes of passion, our impulse murders, the spur of the moment, one-time thing. So again, thank you for watching. I will see you later.